Thank you for having me to speak. This is a lot of fun, and yeah, in the future it would be so much fun to come out and visit. That would be a blast. Yes, I do make a lot of open source software, and a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that's my full time job. It's not. 6 or 7 years ago, I helped co-found a business called Nozzle, and Nozzle is the reason that all of my open source projects really exist. Um, we track Google rankings at scale. So we are a research tool, an analytics tool, a monitoring tool. We we basically go and crawl Google back for all of the search results that you care about, anybody. And we're used by small little indie hacker guys who are doing SEO, and we're also used by a lot of large enterprise companies, and hopefully in the future some even larger projects that we have cooking. But just wanted to shout out to my company Nozzle for inspiring all of the great tools that have come out of it. And there's been great tools like React Query is one of them, React Table. But today I wanted to share with you a new tool that I have created, and it is called React Location. If you get the opportunity, you should head to react-location.tanstack.com and watch the intro video. It's kind of fun. Um, Other than that, I'll tell you about what it does. It is a router. It actually has nothing to do with like the location, I guess, in terms of geo coordinates or lat longs or anything like that. I called it React Location just because obviously React Router was taken, and the location APIs of the browser usually have to do with URL. So it's a router, and it's a very unique, special router in my opinion. It has a lot of asynchronous features that are not built into routers that you're used to using, with concepts like data loaders. It also has a very, very fresh take on using search params. Search params are extremely vital when you're building dashboards and experiences that have a lot of data on the page and a lot of configuration on the page beyond just a route or in-memory stuff. I showed you my tool Nozzle mainly because I wanted to show you all of the different charts and things that are popping up on just this, what we consider very basic dashboard here. You can expand all of these different widgets on the screen, turn them around and change different things about them and explore data. And when you do that in an application, you want to reflect that data in the URL, because you want to be able to share that URL with other people on your team or clients. And this is something that I feel goes very unnoticed and underutilized in our line of work. And usually the question up to this point has been, where do I put my state? Do I put it in my global state manager? Is it server state? Do I use React Query? Is this component state? Do I use X state? But there's also another place that you can put state, and that is in the URL. One of the reasons it has gone underutilized, I believe, is because the APIs for managing state in the URL have been relatively primitive up to this point, and they don't necessarily give you all of the tools and ergonomics that you need to manage those things. I can go over a few quick features with you. I talked about asynchronous routing, and I'm going to show you what all of that is about. I talked to you about the search param APIs that are inside of React Location, and they kind of permeate the entire system. It's not really just one little utility I can show you, but I'm going to demonstrate how the search param API really is just very deeply integrated into the entire router. Beyond that, it also has table stakes features for all the things you would expect from a router. You're going to be able to, navigate programmatically and declaratively. It has nested routing. You can optionally filter and rank routes. It's going to feel very similar in spirit to something like React Router, and but it's going to come with some added features. And really, the biggest distinction here that I want to make for anybody who's confused about why you would use one over the other, we can just pop over here to the comparison page. You're going to notice there are a lot of green marks here around new features, asynchronous routing, loaders, and data, and also search params kind of fall off quickly when compared to something like React Router. But something that React Router is good at is going to be SSR. Server-side rendering is not the goal of React location because it is first and foremost a client-side router. So if you are building a website or a content-driven application where server-side rendering and SEO and robot discoverability are priority number one, then React location is probably not going to be the tool you want to use. It's primarily geared towards people who are building, you know, SaaS model private applications that are behind a login. In fact, I'll show you, Nozzle's application is very different from Nozzle's, marketing website. On Nozzle's marketing website, we're using Next.js, and we could use Gatsby or even Remix. But for the application itself, it doesn't make much sense to try and fit all of the paradigms and concepts of building an application into a server-side rendered framework. You kind of start to have to decide on your trade-offs. And this is a pretty common thing that happens with, in like private applications and auth-only applications. So I wanted a router that was going to, be able to say, what, we don't really care too much about SSR. And because we don't worry about SSR and leave that to the SSR frameworks, we can do a bunch of really cool, nifty things that other routers can't in this space. So let's just get into it. I want to show you an example of what this can look like. So let me just close that. And I'm going to show you what it takes to kind of get started with React location. So out of the box, let's see, we have an installation here, something you're all going to be used to doing. Dev tools, we'll talk about those in a minute. And really out of the gate, we can already start writing our routes. And routes in React location are extremely similar to routes in React Router. The biggest difference is that out of the box, we do not use JSX routes in React location. They're just an object, but they have pretty much the same keys that you would expect. You're just building a route tree here. All of these are valid paths, everything you're very used to. Where you would nest routes inside of another route, in JSX, you just use children and it's an array of more routes. And this is how you build up your matching strategy. So if you had a URL that was, say, /about-me, this route right here would get matched. And right now, we're not really displaying anything at this route. We just have the path there. Once we start bringing in other properties, we can start to display specific elements based on what we match. So if we were to match the /contact route, we would show this contact element. It could also be a string. You can render null. Really, it's just a JSX element that you're passing here. So elements are very powerful. We'll get into those pending states and everything I'm going to show you here in a minute. But that's really just the basics. Our routes look like, an array of objects, and those objects represent, the path structure of our application. We can do things with path parameters, which are essentially just wildcards. You can say anything that matches right here, we're going to throw into a team ID parameter. I'll show you how to use those in a second. And you can also just do like actual wildcard path handlers and get those as well. There's root matchers, which is the only other special matcher, really. You just kind of say, I want to match the index. And you can also do some cool stuff with matching on search params. So you could say, I want to match on team right here, but only if there is a team ID search param present on this URL. So in this case, this team ID 1234, this would match this route. And that's something unique to React location as well. I think it's kind of fun. So I think the easiest way, we could spend all day in the docs here. We're not going to do that. I want to just jump into some code and kind of show you guys how this works. So, and also I would tell the hosts, if you see any questions in the chat that you believe are good to answer in context, feel free to interrupt me and we can just handle it then and there. Otherwise, if it's a general question, we can just handle them, after the fact. But I love handling questions in context during kind of these more casual live demos. This is definitely not a conference talk, so don't worry about interrupting or anything. So this is a little basic example that I've written up, and I'm just going to walk you through some of this code, what it looks like to use React location. So let me expand this over here. We're importing all of our stuff. I'm using Axios to fetch. You could use the fetch API if you wanted. I'm also using TypeScript. So you'll see some types here set up for, here's a post type that has an ID, title, and a body. And these location generics are useful because this location generics type is something that we can pass to basically anything in React location to help it infer what our route specific data is, or our search params are, our search param structure. So in this case, I know that I'm going to be fetching individual posts and lists of posts. So I've kind of created these two types underneath loader data here. And I'll show you where I pass location generics. Step number 1 is create a new React location instance. And then step number 2 is really create your routes, but I'm just kind of doing that in line here. But we use the router component. We pass our location that we created, and then we pass it our routes. And again, routes are just an array of objects. Hold on a sec. So what's happening with these routes right here is we have a route matcher route that's saying, hey, for the root of this routing, we're going to render this index component. Let's go look down at this index component, what that looks like. This is really all it is, just welcome home. So, we're seeing that welcome home right here, but you might have noticed the home and the posts up at the top of the screen. So how are those getting there? Let's head back up to our routes. And you'll see right here inside of our router takes some children. And what's cool is we can, render our router, but not start rendering, matches inside of those routes until we're ready. And that's what this outlet is. If you're familiar with the new React router version 6, you might have heard of this outlet concept, right? This is the nested routing concept that we also use in React location. So this outlet is where we're going to start rendering what we are matching from our routes. So we're on the root right now of this app, and this index element is getting matched. And we're going to start rendering those matches right here in this outlet. So we're able to wrap our entire application, in a nav bar or, whatever we want. There's also this HR here and some links. And these links work within inside of the router, even though we're not matched on anything yet. It's pretty cool. So we can link over to this posts, right? And it's very similar to what you're used to, just link to, and it's a relative link. So it's technically the same as doing something like that. You'll also notice this get active props. Get active props, this is just a function that you can just return more props to, depending on if this link is active or not. Then you can, show it differently. You'll see that it's bolded up here. Home is bolded and post isn't. And that's because our get active props function is just returning this right here, this style font weight bold. So really pretty easy to, use the link component and take, get you places that you want to go. So if we were to click on this, this posts link right here, it's going to take us, it's going to change our URL. So let's click on posts. And it's going to start matching this path right here, this path posts. Notice you don't have to include the slash. You can if you want, but you don't have to. And when it matches this path, we are rendering the posts element. So let's just head down to posts and check out what's going on. This part might look familiar. We obviously are getting posts from somewhere and mapping over each of those individual posts to create a new link to those individual posts. Nothing, super out of the ordinary here. And this is the list of those 5 posts that you're seeing. The real question comes in, where are we getting this post data? And we're doing that with this use match hook right here. So use match, it comes from React location. We're passing it our location generics so that we get types on this post right here. Those location generics are telling our use match hook what is going to be available. So that post type, we're getting all the type assertion and completion down here with that. So how does the data get into use match? Well, if we head up to our routing, our routes right here, on the posts route, you'll see that we have a loader. And loader, it takes an asynchronous function, and you can just return an object of whatever key values you want. In this case, I'm returning posts, and I'm awaiting our little fetch post function here. And fetch posts only takes 300 milliseconds right now. I want to bump it up to 2 seconds and just kind of show you what happens when we navigate. So I'm going to click on posts right now. 0, 1, 2. So you'll notice that there wasn't any loading spinners. There wasn't, it didn't navigate immediately, but it waited for our data to get there before it navigated. And that wasn't super apparent in this basic example because we don't have a lot of visual feedback going on. I'm just going to open up the dev tools here. You can just like React Query, you can use React Location dev tools. Click on the dev tools right here, and I'm going to expand this out so we can see exactly what's going on when we hit posts. Okay. So I'm going to click on posts and just watch this pending matches area down here. You'll see posts and the post matches start loading, and then they come into when they're done, they turn green and it starts to render as the current match. The same thing will happen if we go back to home. It's instantaneous. There's no loader, so it'll be instant. Posts again, it will load the matches. So these dev tools can give you a little bit of a visual about how things are working under the hood. I'm just going to close those again for now. We'll go back to the code. So up here in our loader, we're returning these posts, and that's really all it is for the posts element. As soon as those posts are back, we are going to be positive that those posts are available to render with this use match. It's very similar to suspense. But it actually behaves more ergonomically like Remix, which is actually the API that inspired a lot of what is happening here. It's almost like the Remix API, but for client-side routing, which is kind of fun. Up here, you'll notice one last children route that's happening inside of our posts, and it's interesting because you click on posts right here. There's something that we didn't go over, and it's this outlet. You'll see that we have a hard rule here, and then we have an outlet. And right now it's just showing select a post. And that's because, this is nested routing. And what's happening is when we render that outlet, it's going to continue to match. And in this case, there's nothing being matched after posts. It's just posts and then the root. So we actually have a posts index match right here on the index path that just says select a post. But if we head back up, you'll notice that after the root match, we have this path parameter, this wildcard path parameter for post ID. So if we were to pass anything, post / whatever, it's going to get put into this post ID param, and then let us use that parameter to do various things. The first thing we're doing is we're rendering the posts, the individual posts. We'll look at the element in a second. But the loader itself is going to need to utilize that post ID param. So in our asynchronous function, we're provided with the params right here up to this point. So we know we'll have post ID, and we can actually return just the individual post, awaiting the fetch post by ID with the post ID. And we'll head into this one, and let's crank this up to 1 second. Not so it's super long. I guess we'll take the other one in 1 second as well. So now when we navigate to an individual post, it's going to take about a second to fetch that post, and it won't navigate until we get there. So we're going to click on this first one now, and it loads in. But it loads in underneath it because of nested routing, right? I know nested routing was a big thing that React Router was working on for version 6, and I love nested routing. I missed it when they kind of took it away, and honestly, I think this is it's a fantastic tool for building web layouts. I'm really glad that they brought that back, and I was happy to take that inspiration into React Location as well. So when you come down to the posts, we're rendering that HR and that outlet. So that's where the post match is going to happen. And then our route is specifying the post element right here. So let's check that out. Again, we're using useMatch to get the closest match to what we're rendering. And the data that we have inside of our closest match is the individual post. So we're getting title and body. Again, passing those location generics because that's what's giving us our types. So pretty cool. We render the title and the body, and that's it. That's the entire example for basic. It's really not that complex. It's pretty simple in my opinion. To get started with React Location, you've got dev tools and certain things that can show you what's happening. Interesting things to note, as we're navigating to individual posts here, the parent route of posts is not reloading that list of posts every time. So there is, a very basic level of caching built into React Location. I want to show you even more. So we're going to jump over to a different example. I'm just going to, duck out of this example and head over to the kitchen sink example. This is my favorite example. So the kitchen sink is going to be intense, but it's there to really show you kind of like all of these tools together. What could we, how far can we take it in user experience of getting all these different styles of UX and UI that you would want out of a router. So that's what this kitchen sink is doing. I'm just going to take you through the kitchen sink experience in the UI first and show you, kind of point out some of the things. Let's get this count out of here. That was just a little debugging something I was doing really quick. All right. So here we are at the home of the kitchen sink. So, it says right here, hey, it should feel suspense-like because it is similar in concept like suspense. We only render things when their data and their elements are ready. We are exaggerating some of the async effects. We're using set timeouts to delay things and make things feel longer. And we can actually play around with those values with these sliders right here. It's kind of like a little sandbox. You get to play around with, worst case scenarios. We can also play with other things that I'm going to show you, and even dink around with some prefetching, some preloading here. And we have dev tools if we need them, but we shouldn't need them right now. So the first thing you can see here is there's a little button up here that says one new invoice. This is cool because one new invoice, this is actually deep linking into /dashboard/invoices/3. I'm going to open it up in a new link so you can see right there, dashboard invoices 3. Usually if you are using React Query or some type of component-driven data fetching, that would probably result in one or at least two spinners. You're going to load up first the dashboard, and then you're going to load up the invoices, and then you're going to finally load up the individual invoice. And you'd probably see a bunch of spinners waterfalling down. And you'd even see your network tab start waterfalling down as well. What's nice here is when I click this button, it's not going to have any waterfall at all. We're going to start loading all of the dashboard data all of the invoices and the individual invoice at the same time. And when all of them are complete, we're going to show the new invoice. I'll open DevTools here so we can kind of watch that happen. Click, done. So I know that was really fast. It was actually 500 milliseconds. I can actually slow it down to 1400 milliseconds and we'll see it click. And we actually got a little spinner up there. That was kind of nice. I want to show you that a little bit more because that was kind of cool. I'm going to click one more time. This one takes 2 seconds. So we have like a spinner and finally it resolved everything. So again, it's not displaying anything until everything is ready to load. And we didn't get a bunch of nested waterfall spinners in here either. I'll open up the network panel, and the network panel is fun because a lot of times the network panel is something that server-side firms like Next and Remix. It's always fun to look at the network panel for all these types of requests going on. But it's also fun to look at them for React location. So I'm just going to go to fetch XHR so we can just see the requests going out for the actual posts here. So I'm going to hit new invoice. You'll see posts 3 go out at the same time. So there's no waterfall and they'll both resolve at the same time. So I guess there's nothing new there. As we navigate around, it's going to feel pretty instantaneous. So you can see there's a 500 millisecond delay. And as we click on these individual items, we're even able to put some spinners in there. I will show you how to do that right now because that's kind of a fun one. If we head down to the invoice, not that invoice, we want the function invoices. Right here on our list of invoices, we have the invoice ID, but then we have this cool component called match route. And match route is exactly what it sounds like. It's just, it's like kind of like navigating to a route, but we want to match on it and do something if it does. So if we match the invoice ID and then we pass pending right here, because we don't want to match on our current route, we want to match on where we're going. So we use the pending prop to say we want to match on the pending state and see if we're going to go to this invoice ID. And if we are, it renders the spinner inside it. That's where you get this this nice little spinner inside of here. Now, what if those take a little bit longer, right? Let's make our delay go up by like 4 seconds and click on one of these and see what happens. Okay, so it took a while and you saw an actual hard spinner show up inside of that. We'll do it one more time so you see it right now. That is called the pending state. And it's very similar to a transitional fallback from suspense. The way that we're doing that is up in our routes, we are defining next to our loaders a bunch of pending options. So let's go into our invoices right here. Oh, you know what? We're not even doing it on our routes. We are doing that on our router because you can define globals. Let me show you where that's happening. On our router, some of this has to do with building it as a sandbox. You wouldn't normally do this if you were just building an app. But on our actual router, we can set up some default pending elements. I have the default pending element set to just be this spinner, that's really big. We can also set defaults on things like the default pending milliseconds. So if we were to go to the invoice ID route right here for an individual invoice, I could set the pending milliseconds to something like 1,000. What that means is that if a request to one of these invoice IDs takes longer than a second, we're going to show a pending indicator. Right now I have it set to 4,000 milliseconds. So after a second, you're going to see a pending indicator here. And that's what this pending millisecond says. It says we're willing to wait for 1 second. Now, wouldn't it be interesting what if our request took 1,100 milliseconds? Would you really want to just show that spinner for 100 milliseconds? Like that, it's not a good experience. I wonder if it'll happen here. And see, it didn't happen. It's because we have the default min pending set to 1,000. So let's take that down. See, you get that little flash of a spinner. That's not cool. So the way that we can get around that is you could do a global like I have in this sandbox, or you can do pending min milliseconds. And you could say, if we show the pending state, we want to show it for at least 1 second. So even if, oh, I got to add a comma. So even if even if our request takes 1.1 seconds to load, it doesn't just flash that spinner. We see the spinner for at least a second. So we kind of gradually guide the user through these states. So pending and pending min milliseconds, very, very cool. We can control those globally here. So I'm going to put that back to a second for the minimum pending time and put the pending milliseconds to 2000. So if we take it above that threshold, by 300 milliseconds, you'll notice that we at least see the pending min for about a second, which is really cool. Navigating around, I'll show you some of the search param stuff now. So here we have a pretty typical layout for, searching through some names, sorting, a list of names by something. And, if we were to store this sort by state in, say, React use state, right? Then every single time that we, move out and say, go to summary and then come back to users, it would be dead. Like if we were to hit the back button or anything like that, like this sort by name, see how it went back to name? But with React location, when we navigate back, that state of sort by is saved in the URL. I don't know if you can see that too clearly right here. I can just kind of paste this into VS Code here so you can kind of see how that's working. But we are storing that state on our URL, and to our application, it just looks like JSON. So let's go down to the users component. Let's see right here. We're using the use search hook from React location, and it's giving us our users view. And you'll notice it just looks like JSON, sort by, filter by. And we've got types on here too, because in our location generics, we have defined some search params for this users view. We have a sort by that can only be name or ID or email. We have filter by that can only be a string. So by doing that, we are hinting into our use search hook that users view as a specific shape. And when we want to update it, we update it just by navigating. But when you navigate controlling state, you can do some really nifty things. In this scenario, when we change the sort by, so if I were to change this email to ID, we're saying we want to navigate. We're not changing our path name at all. We just want to update the search param. So we pass a search, but we pass a function, just like you would with like a set state updater. And it gives us the old state of the search params, and we spread it in. And you could use immer here, whatever you want, to immutably update these deeply nested things, or you can just spread like I'm doing here, and we update the individual sort by. So we're not clobbering any of the other state as we're updating it. It works very similar to the ergonomics that you're used to with use state. And then we pass replace true here, because we don't want these changes in sort by to be putting new entries into our history stack. So when we click email, it's not creating a new navigational stack inside of our history. And that way if we take this URL and we open up another tab here, paste this URL in, you can see it went right to users, email is selected. And let's even do a filter by, let's filter to Clem. We get these two users. I'm just going to open a new tab and paste that URL in again, and we have the exact same state. So this is really where the benefits of the search param API come into place here. And you can set these search param APIs using any way you can navigate inside of React location. You can use this API of functional set states and everything. So that means that anything you can command click on to open a new tab is going to be able to behave like this. It's really cool. I think that's everything we can talk about there. I don't know how I'm doing on time. If somebody wants to shout out how much time we have left, that would be great. I'll show you the expensive routes. So it's easy to do code splitting in React location. So I'm going to come up here to our expensive routes that we have right here. So this is just an expensive route. We've called it an expensive route. And what we're doing is the element, which is normally a JSX element, in this case is actually a function, and it's an asynchronous function. We are just delaying the execution a little bit to make it feel like you're actually on a server, where the imports would take a little longer. But we are asynchronously importing this expensive component. And this expensive component just looks like this. It's just a regular function. And so when we import it, we're taking the result and we're just using that expensive export on that. This is kind of like the module here, right? So that's an expensive component. And what's nice is when you click on it, same thing with all the data loading, it doesn't render until it's ready. So if we were to pump that artificial delay up and come back to our expensive component, it's importing that component and then it renders. Very similar to suspense, and you can even still use suspense with this if you really want to. This second route here called really expensive is we are asynchronously importing the entire route or a lot of the parts of the route. So let's go over and check out really expensive. This is what the really expensive route looks like. We just have, we're matching on the really expensive route, and we're doing something different here. This is an element, but it's an import. And the import is allowed to resolve a couple of different things. So let's go over to the really expensive import. And it's able to resolve these route loaders. And route loaders are really just anything that can be asynchronous in React location. So it could be error, it could be any of the elements, loaders, max age, unmatch transition, meta. So there's a bunch of different things that we can asynchronously load from our routes. Things like path, you can't asynchronously load to the path property, but pretty much everything else you can. So in this case, we are importing this loader, which is going to bring in our really expensive component right here and our really expensive timestamp that is going to calculate at the exact same time. So when we click on really expensive, it's importing the entire route. And as soon as the element and the data is ready, they come together and display. And those are all code split as well. So when you saw right here that we were doing the really expensive route, we are importing everything. This could be a federated module. It really could be whatever you want, as long as it's supported in your build system. We could talk. We don't need to spend time in the authenticated thing for now. That's pretty straightforward. But yeah, last thing I will demonstrate, I think before I'm done, and maybe we take some questions, is demonstrating some of React Location's built-in caching mechanisms. So I already talked about this briefly with the last example. I'll talk about it one more time, but you'll notice as I go into the dashboard, let's go into these invoices. Invoices has some data. So, the invoices root has a bunch of these invoice items that we're displaying here. It's crucial to understand that as we navigate around, you'll see that the pending state down here only has the pending orange square for the new invoice, not the list of invoices. And that's because we're doing nested routing, we don't load all of the loaders for routes that are already there, only for new things that are coming in. So we're only loading in the individual invoice in this particular scenario. Moving over to users, we're loading all the users, and then every individual user after that is loaded up. But what if we wanted to actually cache some of these things and make them a lot faster? We can turn on this loader max age. So by default, the max age set for loader data is 0 seconds. As soon as it becomes unused, it's garbage collected. But I just pumped it up to a second. Let's pump it up to 4 seconds right here. So I'm going to go between these users, and you'll notice the first few that I click are going to wait. But this one, if I go back to one that I've already loaded, within 4 seconds, it's instant. We can actually pump this up to 10 seconds. We'll turn our artificial delay down so that we can actually see some of these get cached. So you see the spinner right here, but after the spinner's done, as long as we're within the 10-second time frame of that default max age, these are all just in memory. But yeah, see, as soon as 10 seconds is up, we start to refresh them. So you kind of start to get into some like stale while revalidate features here, even just with inside your router without having to do much changes to it, right? And this is just, how long we're actually keeping the data around. So here's our invoices. If we move, let's see, let's do 2.5 seconds, and let's go to our invoices. So we loaded the invoices. If we go up to home, we come back to invoices, it'll be instant. But if we wait for 2.5 seconds before, so let's do 1, 2, 3, we come back, it's going to have to load those invoices, but it was really fast. So here's where it starts to get really fun. So we have a 500 millisecond delay on all of these. And let's turn off our caching. So every single one of them is going to get garbage collected all the time. But now let's turn on our preloading. So let's turn preloading on, and let's say anything that we preload, we're going to keep in memory for 3 seconds, okay? Preloading is cool because at the link level, when you define a link to something, if you want, you can just say preload, and it takes a number. You could say, hey, preload for 4 seconds, right? Or we can set it up as the default link preload. And because it's a sandbox, it's kind of abstracted a little bit, but we're setting up the default link preload max age in our router right here. And that's tied to this little slider right here. We have it set to 300 milliseconds. What this means is that any link that we hover over, I'm going to open up the network panel here and just refresh. Watch as I hover over these links. You'll notice that with each one that I hover over, it starts to prefetch. And as I hover over the old ones, they're not prefetching unless it's been 3 seconds after the last prefetch. Let's do that one more time. I'll hover over this one, and I'll just keep coming in and out of it, and you'll see that every 3.5 seconds, it'll say, oh, you know what? We need to load a fresh one. But the nice thing about this is as we scroll down this list, and it's like, oh, this is the one that I want. By the time you click on it, it's done. It only took 500 milliseconds to fetch it, which in real world scenarios is probably only going to take you about max 200 milliseconds to fetch some of this stuff. So watch the network panel. I'm just going to cruise down here and pick this one. It's instantaneous. We probably don't even see a loading indicator on a lot of these. And if we do, it's only visible for a split second. We'll go over to users. And I remember I set this up for the entire application using the default prefetch. So every single thing I'm hovering over, even these expensive components, it's prefetching the data and the elements, the imports for these expensive components as I hover over them, essentially removing all spinners from your application depending on the speed of your API, right? But if we didn't show any spinners at all, and we put this default pending, milliseconds to super high, and made our API really fast, there's really no reason that you should really ever see a spinner. You know what I mean? There would be very few scenarios where, oh, you know what, we know this route's going to take a really long time, so we're actually going to wait and show a spinner for it. But you'll notice that I'm not using React Query. I'm not using any other like caching mechanisms. All I'm doing is just writing my routes and clicking around, and everything just feels instant. I think we're good to wrap up. There's a whole lot more you can look at. If you go to react-location.handstack.com, there's guides and concepts that we're still writing out. You can do breadcrumbs, and we have JS URL search compression, which is cool. There's a simple cache. There's ways to integrate with React Query. If you're really hell bent on writing your routes as JSX, you can do that, and we just transform them into arrays. So I'm really excited about React Location, and I'm using it in my SPAs, all of them now. If I'm not using a React framework, like an SSR framework, I'm using React Location now, and I'm really excited about what it can do for people who are building apps.